Alrighty, so it's been about a month and a half since I posted my last video. Just wanted to do a little bit of an update for anyone who's interested. Show you guys what I've been working on, what's coming up next. Maybe some tips and tricks that I've learned if they pop into my head along the way, as well as a couple of the products I've been finding useful, just in case anyone's interested. This is what was featured in the last layout update from late November. This is the big horseshoe curve here, representing the mountains of West Virginia. It's a typical, table style benchwork with a whole bunch of risers. That was just what ended up working out best for me, flexibility wise, not knowing exactly what I wanted with the track plan. So in the last video, I showed you guys that I had made a ton of these risers, adhered them into place, kept a few of them loose so that I'd be able to make adjustments to where my future bridge abutments will go. And that's kind of where I left off. I've now went ahead and put a top layer of foam on these. It's still pretty rough cut. I will, depending upon what scenery is going to be adjacent to the tracks, I will go ahead and cut a little bit closer, or maybe even add extra foam to bring the useful layout space up to the same track height. But for now, it's it's just roughed in this foam path for the top surface. Just give you a little bit of a walk around here. And of course, I did go through and I started working on track. This is all just set on top of here right now. I do have some track on the other side of the layout that I'll show you guys that I've been starting to lay, but I did do the double track mainline all the way around. So there's 60 feet of double track mainline, or about 120 feet of total mainline length between the two that's now got cork roadbed applied. And I just use typical extra cheap, Alex. Alex is the product name. It's by DAP, but it's just a basic acrylic latex caulk, and that's what I use to adhere down this cork roadbed. Of course, it's Midwest Products cork roadbed like everybody else uses, so nothing special there. For my track spacing, I did do for long straightaways, I did 2 inches on center between the main lines, and then excuse me, during transitions into curves and the curves themselves, I went with 2.5 inch spacing, just because there'll be a lot of long modern equipment, 85-foot am fleets and auto racks and things like that. So again, here is an area where there wasn't enough straight length to bring the tracks any tighter, so I kept this at 2.5 inches, and it extends at that track spacing all the way around this curve. Do a little bit of a walk around here. So this is where the track work starts, and it goes across a lift bridge, which I'll talk a little bit about. Again, sorry for the mess. It's the typical modeler's curse that you got to have 1,000 things sitting out on your workbench. So we're just going around the curve here. This is all temporary. If you don't see white caulk underneath it, it's just temporary. But what we're following right now, this inner main line is all adhered into place up to here. So like I said, I got about 30 feet of that done. And just for reference, the smallest mainline radius is actually over here, surprisingly. And I think the inner track there has a 30 or 30.5 inch radius, and then the outer is 2.5 inches bigger than that. And then I think everywhere else I was able to fit in, like this corner, as well as this corner, I was able to fit in 32 inch minimum radius, and then 34.5 for the radius of the outer track there. Roll this through for you just for kicks. Been doing a little bit of testing here as things start to get going, and it does roll relatively well. Haven't found any tight spots yet, but always good to move your tools out of the way, but always good to test before you get too far along and carried away. I'll talk a little bit about this bridge. I tried to mimic the best techniques I could find from some of the more famous modelers and then make some of my own improvements and modifications for my particular situation along the way. So it's all built out of pine. The top is a 5-layer thick plywood. I don't actually know what the total thickness there is, but the supports underneath I can say are just cut down 1x4s. And one thing that I did make sure to do is I used old wood. So a lot of times if you have new wood, even plywood, if you cut it down to size and eventually it goes through a heating cycle in your home over the course of a season, it'll oftentimes warp. So there are supports longitudinally, like I said, to help prevent that from happening. But this was wood that was excess, sitting in my garage over a couple seasons. Through those cycles, it stayed relatively straight. So I'm fairly confident that inside the house, it's gonna remain pretty straight as well. Jumping over here, this guy is a little bit ugly, but it does have a purpose. So this is the over travel stop that helps prevent damage from happening when these rails go all the way back and they overhang a little bit. So if this wasn't in place, even though it is ugly, unfortunately, one wrong move and you'd be damaging your bridge tracks, and that's a lot to fix. So this was important to get up there early. And also under here, this is a key feature to make this possible. These are the Euro style cabinet hinges. You can find them at Home Depot. I think the brand is Everbuilt. And then you can see there's some feeder wires that are just taped to the side. This is something I'm gonna sand down a little bit. Of course, might be illegal to be defacing US currency, but I needed a hard stop on the left side, the right side, and then the bottom, so that I could have some adjustable contact points to really fine tune the position of this bridge. So I thought about using washers, but those have a hole in the middle, and that would contribute to some variation in the contact point and all that stuff. So eventually I'll sand this down a little bit, and this will just be a good contact to touch the adjustable bolts that are over here. So essentially you just drop it into place. I guess jumping back for a minute, the strategy is that on the hinge side, zoom in a little bit here, on the hinge side, you have a back cut 45-degree angle on your track. That was necessary to make sure there wasn't contact or rubbing between these rails as you raise the lift bridge, because where your hinge point is and the way things lay, it's not possible on this back side for the hinge side to have a straight cut up and down. So that's why there's a 45-degree angle there. And then that angle, you could certainly do that on the non-hinge side, like the opening side, but it's not really necessary. So I did just go with a straight up and down cut in this area at 90 degrees. Looks like one of these is getting just a little bit out of alignment, but the other one's actually quite close. I'll jump away from the bridge for a second to tell you guys about what this product is that I'm using on both sides of the bridge to help align things. So you can see the little puzzle-shaped end there and how it interlocks to the fixed side. So what that is, excuse me, that's actually a product that is made by ModelTech. So they make a couple products that I've been really liking and using a lot. Excuse me. Basically, this is 3 ties with some area to solder your rails to. And also got a couple other cool features. So there's a hole in each of these ties so that you can put a track nail into to hold it into place. So I definitely like using those. And then this hole and this hole are for your feeder wires. So there's actually electrical conductivity. There's a path of conductivity to the area that you'll be soldering your rails to. So that's what makes it easy. You don't have to, make a custom PCB board cut to size like some people will do. This just makes it, all in one. You've got an attachment, a place for feeder wires, a place for soldering, as well as the very interesting and helpful pattern at the end for interlocking with another piece on the opposite side. So I don't have the advertising that came with these track aligners, but it's made by the same company that makes these power feeder ties. Very similar concept. It's called ModelTech. They're out of the UK. So there's their website for anybody who's interested. Of course, you just put a little bit of flux on there and away you go. So these are individual ties just for dropping feeders. I really like these as well. Where all those holes are drilled, you basically just break off a feeder tie, kind of sand the edges. Depending upon what brand of track you use, this goes for both of these products. You may want to run the backside of your part along some 60 grit, some pretty rough sandpaper a while. You know, I'll do, it's not a ton of work. It sounds like more than it is, but I usually will do running across a piece of sandpaper like 50 times or so to just knock a little bit of height off there so that it matches my Atlas flex track, just so that when you're putting a feeder tie in place, you're not lifting the track. And again, when you go to make a connection like on your bridge over here, you're not lifting up those rails right at the transition point across. So hopefully that makes sense, and you can kind of see what's going on here with this product. I still got to do some filing down of the solder job, and you know, of course, all these logos will eventually be covered up and hidden when the track gets painted, but you can kind of see how everything works there. And it fits together pretty nicely. It is key that you want to have the, on the moving side, which is what I'm holding now, the bridge, you do want to have a little bit of overlap of your alignment tie, your rail liners, because then that's going to set your height to be exactly the same as what it is on the fixed side. So that's something to keep in mind if you do make one of these bridges. And then, I don't know if I already talked about this, but essentially these are just some metal inserts that get pounded into, zoom out a little bit here. Yeah, some, excuse me, some metal inserts that get pounded into these, this pine wood structure that I have over here. And then threaded into that is a few bolts. And then as needed, I can make adjustments in the vertical height to set the bridge above it just by, you know, threading in and threading out these bolts. And then, like I mentioned before, those contact these coins, which will be sanded down a little bit. And so that's what sets your height and keeps everything in alignment. And then just a quick tip here. Some people that I've heard that have used this style of, you know, adjustable bolts before complained about how these bolts are free spinning, and they, you know, switched to a different method because they didn't like that these would always get out of place. A real quick, simple method that I used to avoid that issue was I just got the, I actually used the super thin super glue by Bob Smith Industries, but it's a thinner version. I think it's in a green container, but I just put a couple dabs on each one of these bolts, and then it seeps into, you know, between the male and the female threads, and it adds just enough resistance that if you want to make an adjustment to this, you can pull it all the way out. You can tweak it just a little bit, but it prevents the free spinning and free rotation of this, so that every time you lift this, you're not throwing your bridge ever so slightly out of alignment. They just stay exactly where you have put them in position. So I think that's pretty much everything about the bridge. We talked about the big curve over here. Got some pictures of my cat up there. Here's a diorama that I will sometimes use to showcase stuff that I'm selling. It's nothing fancy. A lot of the detail parts are actually removed right now, but it just provides a, you know, a scenic background and gave me a little bit of a chance to do some modeling here. And then this is my wife's diorama. She's doing a farm scene, so she's got the garden up here and the tulips and the plants and the family hanging up their laundry, chickens, cows, sheep, all that good stuff. I just pan around here. This is where the big yard will be. There'll be a couple industries along the backdrop here, as well as a small town. I guess the last thing I can show you guys is I can go through some of the pile of tools that I have here for anybody who's interested. So I do really like the acrylic caulk for adhering the cork roadbed as well as for adhering the track. This is the exact product that I use. Just put that on with a caulk gun and then use a putty knife to spread that into place. The thinner the layer, the better. I have definitely had a lot of squeeze out, and as you can tell, eventually that'll need to be sanded off or painted. Talked about all these nice ModelTech products that I really like. NMRA track gauge, making sure that as you put down your flex track that things are staying engaged is definitely important, especially as you solder together multiple lengths of flex track in the corners and you're trying to get things to align. I was actually surprised that at a few of these points things got out of alignment. So what I actually did is I would use one of these feeder ties, not actually use it for its feeder wire purpose, but just use the solder contacts on each side to basically I would pinch the rails together or pull them apart just a little bit, you know, 1/2 millimeter or whatever is needed, solder this in place, and that'll hold it to get the right gauge there. That was a trick that I started using recently to fix issues with the gauge. Sanding sticks, got these off Amazon. These are definitely useful for when you snip your rail and you gotta get a burr off or something like that. Got the tried and true rail nippers. These are super useful, and I probably do need to replace these before too long because I've probably made about 100 cuts so far. I think this is just a generic Chinese brand, but these really come in handy, and they save a lot of time over using having to get out a Dremel for everything and spend your time getting through there, or using one of those little zip saws that I think Atlas has, the kind of the manual handheld saw. This is the soldering iron I use. Got the flux over here. This is actually pretty useful. This is just a standard tack hammer with a really small head for putting in these very, very small tacks that Atlas makes to go in between the rails themselves. And then what else do we have here? So this is made by Hako, but I think many other companies make it. It's basically just a cleaning chemical paste for the tip of your soldering iron. That way you're not tempted to use an abrasive or something to continually keep your soldering iron tip clean and tin it. This is pretty good stuff. You just dip it in right there, and has cleaning properties as well as improves the conductivity. This is just a bucket of all the different ties that I removed so that I can nip off some of these parts and remove any that I need, and then I can fill, if I just want 2 at a time and I need to fill a space over here, I can just slip those in. And better than needing to trash a new piece of flex track if you just keep a bundle of these to the side. Here's just some more of those feeder ties. Got a few little boxes that I use for trying to keep things organized. And then this is the wire that I'm actually using for the feeders. So it's a roll of 100. I think it was probably like $30 at the time, but it's already got, if I show you here, it's already got both of the red and white, positive and negative wires together in some insulation. So it makes it a lot easier to manage all of your feeder wires. And here's just a quick example of what a finished, it's sloppy because there's, fresh solder on there and things need to be filed a little bit more and covered up with some nice tie-colored brown, but basically you can tell that the feeder wires went through. I nipped them off, and I did end up sanding them. And then I guess another thing I can show you guys is I did start using some Sharpie to color code the tops of the rails so that I could keep kind of my system of feeder wires and things straight. But essentially every other piece of flex track I solder together. So I'll solder together 2 at the ends. And in between sections of 2, I leave in a gap in the rail of about the thickness of a business card. So that's why you see some red Sharpie right there. That's indicating for me in my recollection that this is a joint that's floating. It's not fixed. There's some solder on, hopefully you can see that. There's some solder on the connector itself. but there's not any solder between the rails. It's just allowed to expand and contract as needed. So you do get conductivity transfer, but you also have that room to move. So here's the other one that's that same way. This is an example of me not using the feeder tie, you know, for feeder wires, but just using it to set the gauge in that area. And then in the other areas where I put blue Sharpie, I'll go back to here. You can see that this is an area, it's kind of hard to see that this is actually where a rail joiner was used, but the rail joiner is right below the blue. There is no gap set there, and the rail joiner itself is soldered in there. So you'll get conductivity as well as retention between the two rails. And again, I do that every other. So color-coded blue means it's connected and red means it's floating. I guess another thing that I'll show you guys is this just started coming in handy. If you need to unsolder something, a lot of times it's hard to heat up a big enough area of solder to be able to actually remove it. I have used products in the past like this, which is a desoldering wick. This honestly takes a really long time. You got to kind of fray the end, stick it into your solder as you melt it, and then, okay, hey, it sucked up some of the solder. Now I got to cut it off, keep doing it. This does have its place, but if you use this, essentially what you're doing is creating suction to remove liquid solder. So you would heat up the area, you depress this, you click this button, and through this tube there's an incredible amount of suction that's created, and it just sucks all of that liquid solder up into here, and then you just push it out by using the same motion, and then you just keep clicking on that, and you can actually remove a pretty good amount of solder this way. It's especially useful if you're doing something like this where you have a large area or a large linear length of solder being applied to, you know, be able to remove that in a large amount. So yeah, that's pretty much what I've been working on. Sorry, it got a little bit lengthy at the end, but hopefully some of you guys will benefit from knowing some of the tools that I've been using and product names, brands, and things like that. And you can see, you know, the basics of the bridge, how the curve's been going, and what else is going on. Up next is really just over the next couple months continuing to work on this main line. I'm about a quarter of the way through it for the you know, the feeder wires and putting the track in place. So fingers crossed that I'll get a good amount of that done and can have trains running in the next few months. Thanks for watching.